While Bonaparte waited for the right moment to seize power, he set his sights on new glories in the exotic East. He eluded a British fleet, and on July 1st, 1798, landed with 35,000 soldiers in Egypt. France was still at war with Great Britain, and Bonaparte hoped to disrupt British trade routes to India. In 1798, Egypt was still a source of wonder to most Europeans. The souks crowded with Turks and Jews, Syrians and Greeks. The minarets sounding the call of an alien religion. The Sphinx with its broken nose buried in the sand up to its neck.
Bonaparte finds himself in a country of legends, myths, and a great history. But it was really madness on his part, because all of the military calculations at the time held that it was impossible for a European army to conquer the East. It is completely absurd. The Egyptian expedition is probably the craziest expedition in the history of France.
Bonaparte quickly captured Alexandria, and then on July 3rd led his soldiers across the desert toward Cairo, and a looming battle. For centuries, the Egyptians had been part of the Turkish Empire, ruled by the fiercest warriors in the Middle East, the Mamelukes. Remarkable for their courage, pride, and cruelty, the Mamelukes waited fearlessly for the French armies. One Mameluke prince called them donkey boys. "I will cut off their heads," he said, "like watermelons in the fields."
They weren't afraid of Napoleon at all. The Mamelukes were brought up with fierce principles of courage and chivalry. Fear was not part of their tradition.
After marching 2 weeks across the desert, Bonaparte's armies came within sight of the pyramids, and 10,000 Mamelukes drawn up on horseback across the sands. Soldiers, Bonaparte said, "From the height of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." The Mamelukes charged. They start, it was said, like lightning, and arrive like thunder.
The Mamelukes are beautiful, magnificent, their horses rearing, plunging. Napoleon himself recognizes their courage.
Bonaparte's men stood in tight formation and held their fire until the Mamelukes reached within 50 paces of their ranks.
The Mamelukes charged the cannon with their sabers and their horses, with arms from the Middle Ages. It was a meeting between the Europe of the future and the Egypt of the past.
Napoleon just organized his army into 5 gigantic squares. These are men kneeling and standing and firing, so you've got a continual rolling fire. The Mamelukes rode around the squares and were shot at by that square and by this square. The French lost 30 men. The Mamelukes lost probably 5,000 or 6,000.
The Battle of the Pyramids was over in an hour. 3 days later, Bonaparte led his army into Cairo. "I was full of dreams," he said. "I saw myself founding a new religion, marching into Asia riding an elephant, a turban on my head, and in my hand the new Quran." But Bonaparte's dreams of empire were quickly shattered. The British Admiral Horatio Nelson caught the French fleet anchored off the Egyptian coast and blew it to pieces. Bonaparte and 35,000 soldiers were trapped in Egypt. Cut off from France, Bonaparte remained undaunted. Installed in a palace in Cairo, he imagined himself an Eastern potentate, following in the footsteps of Alexander the Great.
He came to Egypt at the head of an army, and suddenly he found himself at the head of a nation. And it's not just any nation, it's Egypt.
Egypt was an enigma to Europeans. Bonaparte saw a chance to be the first to unravel its mysteries. Along with his army, he had brought with him a remarkable group of mathematicians, artists, mapmakers, and engineers. They set about producing a monumental document, a description of Egypt, 24 volumes of text and pictures. They studied the crocodile and the ibis, music and mummies, surveyed temples and tombs, and measured the dimensions of the Sphinx. One scientist found a new species of blue water lily, another an unknown Nile fish. The most dramatic discovery of all was a big black stone with some puzzling inscriptions. The Rosetta Stone would prove to be the key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphics.
The monumental volumes that were published by the scientists that went along with Napoleon to Egypt laid the foundation for this study of Egyptology today.
The true conquests, Bonaparte wrote, the only ones that leave no regret, are those that have been wrested from ignorance. In February 1799, Bonaparte took 13,000 soldiers into Syria. The Sultan of Turkey had declared war on the French infidels, and Bonaparte went on the offensive. After a quick victory at Jaffa, he assaulted Accra, where he was forced to lay siege to the well-fortified city. Attack after attack failed, claiming the lives of hundreds of French soldiers. Hundreds more were struck down by the bubonic plague. Bonaparte abandoned the siege and retreated to Cairo with a dispirited army of sick and wounded men.
The army was terribly demoralized.
À mesure que le temps passe, on se demande pour quelle raison on se trouve en Égypte. La République n'est pas menacée.
They began asking themselves, what are we doing here in Egypt? There is no threat to the Republic. Our colleagues are dying of the plague, dysentery, or in combat against a determined enemy.
But Bonaparte refused to admit the extent of the disaster. "I am returning to Cairo with many prisoners and flags," he proclaimed. "I raised the ramparts of Accra. There is not a stone left standing."